Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a topic that's pretty sensitive inside the church right now.
Very sensitive.
It's the relationship between the two forms of the Roman Rite. So what most people call the New Mass or the Novus Ordo and the traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah, the TLM.
Yeah.
And it's an area that can get really polluted by factionalism, by, a lot of anger.
For sure.
So our source for this deep dive is a discussion with Dr. Scott Hahn, who really tries to cut through all that noise. He's not about picking sides. He wants to offer a framework for balance and honesty.
Exactly. So our mission here is to unpack his thinking. It comes from his own experience, and it all started with a question from a former student. And his whole perspective is this both-and approach.
Right.
He wants us to see the validity in the new rite, but also recognize what he calls the spiritual benefits of the old, and then look toward a glorious convergence.
It's such a needed perspective. It's almost like an antidote to the sectarianism you see online, It gives you a way to appreciate the whole liturgical tradition of the church without falling into that trap of being angry or judgmental.
Okay, so let's start with his theological foundation. Because this is really what holds the whole thing together. It stops it from just becoming another fight.
Mm.
His core point is totally unambiguous. He says, every valid Mass is heaven on earth.
Yes, that is the bedrock.
Right.
Whether it's the Novus Ordo, whether it's the TLM, if it's valid, you have heaven on earth.
It just cuts through everything.
It does. It means validity is what matters. The language, the music, the vestments, all that is secondary to the reality that the Eucharist is Christ. The focus has to be on the sacrifice.
What's really interesting to me, though, is how he holds these two ideas in tension. And it's based on his own life.
Right.
He says he's actually more at home in the Novus Ordo. That's the Mass he came into the church with, the one he went to for decades. But then he says attending the traditional Latin Mass has been transformative.
And that experience, that sort of dual citizenship, gives him the credibility to make a really subtle distinction.
Which is?
He affirms the validity of the Novus Ordo, like we said. It works. It is heaven on earth. But he also argues for the objective superiority of the Latin Mass.
Okay, wait a minute. We need to pause there. Because if every valid Mass is heaven on earth, how can one be objectively superior? Doesn't that sort of contradict the whole idea?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's key. He doesn't mean superior in sacramental efficacy.
So the bread and wine still become Christ.
Exactly. In both. The superiority he's talking about is in, let's say, theological consistency and historical weight. The TLM has been around for more than 1,500 years. It's the church's inherited language, so it's superior because of that history, that stability.
Which brings us to that whole connection between how we pray and what we believe. Lex orandi, lex credendi.
Right, the law of prayer is the law of belief. But Hahn adds a third piece to it.
Lex vivendi.
The law of life. And this is where he gets, I think, really critical. He's concerned that what he calls the valid experiment of the 60s of concocting Eucharistic prayers created a new problem.
An expectation.
Yes, an expectation of change.
Okay, so connect the dots for me.
Huh.
How does expecting the liturgy to change lead to expecting doctrine to change?
Well, think about it. If the way we worship is presented as something that's always up for grabs, something we can innovate on or, tinker with, it creates a kind of cultural assumption.
I see.
And that assumption is, well, if we can tinker with the lex orandi, the prayer, why can't we also tinker with the lex credendi, the doctrine, or the lex vivendi, how we live our lives? It sort of removes that sense of permanence.
So the old rite, just by being stable and unchanging, was a kind of guardrail. It reinforced that the faith itself was stable, not just in church on Sunday, but in everything.
Precisely. The fixed liturgy projected a faith that was equally fixed in its core beliefs.
Okay, so let's shift from the theology to the mindset. Because Hahn identifies a real danger for people who discover the TLM.
Right. The danger of becoming a mad trad.
Yeah, and he says he's known a lot of them. And they're defined by anger, bitterness, a real sectarian impulse.
And that just misses the point entirely. If loving tradition makes you hate other Catholics, you've completely misunderstood the Mass. So Hahn's solution is that you need to be a glad trad.
He has some great names for himself. He calls himself a Tridentine.
And a stratismatic.
We have to unpack stratismatic. What on earth is that?
He's having fun with it, but it's actually really insightful. A Stradivarius violin is, the best. It's classical, traditional, objectively superior. A stratismatic is someone who sees that objective beauty in the classical form.
But has the outward-focused joy of a charismatic or a Pentecostal.
Exactly. Love the form, but don't turn it into a weapon. The point he's making is that it's the Mass itself that saves the Church. Any valid Mass, Orthodox, Eastern rites, whatever, not some movement.
Not a movement, right.
Yeah.
And he's got a lot of sympathy for the younger generation in all this. He says they're looking for a heritage that was never given to them.
They feel like the older generation just abandoned the TLM.
And you can kind of see why, right? When they look back at that era, they see what was lost. And then they see what replaced it was sometimes just bizarre.
I mean, Hahn mentions hearing about a marijuana mass in '69 or clown masses. He has this great line for it all.
FAD is just an acronym for a day.
Perfect, isn't it? When you put 1,500 years of stability up against something that's literally for a day, you can understand why young people are hungry for roots.
But he also points out there's an awkwardness to it. It's
What?
like you're reclaiming something that wasn't actually passed down to you.
Yeah, his analogy is like buying a beautiful antique. It's gorgeous, it's valuable, but it's not from your family. It's not part of your story yet.
It hasn't become second nature.
Right, and the hope is that it will, that it stops being a statement or a curiosity and just becomes how you pray. He really wants to get past the blame game. He says that fight, over who is to blame, neither side will win.
Which brings us to his optimistic part, his vision for the future. The glorious convergence.
Yes. And it's not about getting rid of the Novus Ordo. It's about letting the crazier experiments die out and then making sure the Novus Ordo that remains is celebrated with just profound reverence.
And he has real-world examples of this. This isn't just a theory for him.
No, it's happening. He points to the 10 a.m. Novus Ordo Mass at his own parish.
And what does that look like in practice? What are the elements of this convergence?
Well, there are three really big ones. First, it's celebrated ad orientem.
Okay, let's just quickly define that for anyone who doesn't know.
Sure. It just means to the east. The priest and the people are all facing the same direction towards the altar, towards God. The focus isn't on the priest's personality anymore.
Okay, so that's one. What else?
They use Latin in the Mass parts. And third, and this is a really visible one, they receive communion on our knees at the old rail.
So you're taking these ancient signs of reverence and integrating them directly into the new Mass.
Exactly. It's a blending. He uses this wonderful analogy from Pittsburgh, where he lives, about the two rivers, the Monongahela and the Allegheny.
And they come together to form the Ohio River.
That's how he sees it. The Novus Ordo and the Latin Mass tradition are these two streams coming together in a beautiful, life-giving way. And he's really hopeful about the next generation of priests leading this.
That does seem to be the direction things are moving in many seminaries, this kind of openness to both streams.
It suggests we're moving past the conflict and towards a unity that's built on shared reverence.
Okay, but what about the person listening to this who feels like a refugee? Their local parish Mass feels empty or irreverent, and they're tempted to just check out of the Western Rite entirely. Maybe go Byzantine Catholic or something.
Hahn talks about this. He actually considered it himself, and a priest friend gave him some very, very blunt advice.
Which was?
Two things. First, he said, you are a Westerner. And second, he said that to do church shopping is a vestige of your Protestantism.
Oof. That's tough to hear, especially in our culture where we're told to always find the best experience.
It is. But the advice was to bloom where you're planted. The point is that the Western Rite is not inferior to the Eastern. The challenge isn't to run from the mess, but to try and bring holiness to the place where God put you.
And this idea of obedience, of staying put even when leadership is flawed, he backs this up with the story of a saint.
St. Mary MacKillop, the Australian saint, her story is just the ultimate model of this. She was excommunicated by her bishop.
A bishop who was, by all accounts, a terrible leader.
Possibly an alcoholic, definitely abusive in his authority, but she never spoke up or criticized him. She just endured it with obedience and silence, and eventually she was brought back. It's presented as profoundly Catholic.
Trusting the institution even when the people in it are failing.
Right. And that kind of profound reverence is what makes a liturgy transcendent, whatever the form. Hahn contrasts the bad experiments he saw in the 80s, being commanded by the priest to stand around the altar, with the reverence he sees in a group like Opus Dei today.
And they celebrate the Novus Ordo.
Yes, and he calls their masses so beautiful, so sacred, so reverent and transcendent.
So it's not about the form, ultimately. It's about the attitude, the reverence.
It's about putting God at the center, not us. When that happens, the objective reality of the Mass can just shine through.
So if we pull back and look at the whole picture, Hahn's framework just completely sidesteps the blame game.
Mm-hmm.
He's not interested in who's right or who's wrong.
No, it's yes and yes and yes, the classic Catholic both and. He validates the new, He respects the old, and he points a way forward.
There's one final story he tells that I think just perfectly sums up the entire goal of all of this.
The story about his friend, the priest, who said his first traditional Latin Mass.
Yes, for a community of Carmelite nuns.
Yeah.
And afterwards, he goes to the Mother Superior and he says, "This is the single most joyful day of my life."
And the reason he gives, it's everything.
He says, "I have never been at Mass where I disappeared."
It wasn't my personality, it wasn't my accent, it wasn't anything that was me, I disappeared. That's the whole point. True reverence, in any rite, makes the priest's personality disappear so that all that's left is the worship of God.
So here's the final thought for you to take with you. If the whole point of the liturgy is for the human personality to just disappear into the worship of God, what's one practical step you can take in your parish right now to help make that happen? To maximize reverence and minimize self-focus, both for yourself and maybe for others.
It's about becoming a glad trad in whatever form of the Mass you attend.
Thank you for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you next time.